Hey everybody, I'm nutritionist Dr. Mike Roussel, and welcome to this episode of the Dr. Mike Show, where we're going to unpack my top 7 tips for optimizing your child's nutrition. Good news is, if you don't have any kids, or if you do have kids, these tips are going to work for you too, because while they do work for kids, they are just as good for adults. So tune in, let's get into it. All right, so before we get into how the 7 tips, my top 7 tips for boosting your child's nutrition, there was something that came up in the past week that I thought would be worth talking to you guys about. Partly because I think, we've talked about this on the show before. A huge issue with nutrition is just the confusion around nutrition. And as much as I work and do work in nutrition media is a huge part of the problem. Because if you're going to post 5, 6 things every single day about nutrition, you have to create controversy and excitement for no reason other than get people to click. So unfortunately, I get a million inbound messages, like literally 1 million, right? 1 million messages a day from PR companies pitching ideas, generally story ideas about products. And most of them are canned. Somehow, like the PR marketing world has gotten around the Canned Spam Act, and they can just like spam you from these listservs without your consent. And there's literally no way to unsubscribe. It's insane. So if you are a PR person that sends me canned messages, just know I'm reporting them as spam. But it's not to say that all PR people are bad, because, Jordan, Dean, if you're watching the show, I love you guys. And there are some really great PR people. The people at Quest, those PR people are great too. So they are really good. But most of the time, I just get hit with these messages. So I got one. I want to share with you this message because it was so bad. And it also really just highlighted, this is someone fishing to get a story published that would only create confusion around what you should do, combined with just really bad nutrition advice. So the subject line was tips and tricks, how to get 100 grams of protein a day, right? And so I think I was like, oh, well, I'm be interested to see what their tips and tricks are. And they talk about, it says, if we're getting the essential 100 grams of protein per day, we're fueling our bodies to build up muscle. Now, if you have watched the show before or listened to the show before, 100 grams of protein, unless you weigh 100 pounds, is not going to help you build muscle, right? With 100 to 120 grams of protein, or like 90 to 120 grams of protein, that puts us in the optimal range, right? For just optimizing protein intakes for overall health. But if we really want to build muscle, if we're actively exercising, we need to recover from that exercise, we really need to start pushing that 1 gram per pound body weight. So if you want to build muscle and you're eating 100 grams of protein per day, you basically it's no chance. It's an uphill slog for sure. So bad advice, number 1. And then it says, it's not easy if you're looking at boiled chicken, eggs, and steak every day. Well, boiled chicken is just gross unless you're going to shred it and make enchiladas, right? So that just sounds bad. But eggs and steak every day, I mean, that's a good day. If I have eggs and steak, I consider that a good day. So that's not too bad. But also the steak part is interesting, and you'll hear why. Okay, so I'm going to skip who this is from and the product that's promoting, but just know it's promoting a protein powder, right? So this expert, quote unquote expert, has the right tips to make tracking your protein intake easy. So they recommend to consistently get 100 grams of protein a day every day. You have 2 scoops of their protein powder, 1 chocolate, 1 vanilla, and half a cup of egg whites. I don't know why you would do this. Like, why would you mix? And I apologize for I feel like I'm extra salty on today's show. Why would you mix 1 scoop of chocolate and 1 scoop of vanilla and then half a cup of egg whites? Especially like a paragraph earlier, we were slogging eggs, right? Eggs and steak is being boring. It gets better though. Have half in the morning and half in the afternoon, because nothing is more delicious than egg whites and protein that have been sitting around for 4 hours in liquid, right? And then they say how this is going to pack, 60 grams of protein. So here's terrible advice. Get 2/3 almost of your protein intake from protein shakes and then eat the rest from food, right? Don't do that. Like I've literally formulated and produced a protein powder, and I will tell you this should not be your primary source of protein. It's a tool for convenience and for accelerating recovery, right? That's really what it should be. And so in this case, this is a bad idea. Like 2/3 of your protein intake should not be protein shakes. Let's not do that. And then it goes on. It's so good. This is so good, and by so good I mean so bad. When considering how to round out your protein intake, here are some other go-to meals. Swap out rice for quinoa, which is packed with protein. This is also super interesting. I don't know, quinoa has no PR, right? Agents or reps, but they get a lot of good PR of being this high protein grain. Quinoa and oats are pretty similar on a protein basis. Quinoa is a complete protein, so it's one of those unique plants, soy, quinoa, and pistachios being, kind of the trifecta of complete proteins. But if you're looking at swapping out brown rice for quinoa, a cup of quinoa has 8 grams of protein, and a cup of brown rice has 5 grams of protein. So you're not really making this huge protein switch. You're net 3 grams. So that's not great. Oh, but then the second option is steak, which I love steak. But 2 paragraphs before, we were slogging steak about how wouldn't it be terrible if we had to eat steak every day. And then steak is one of the protein options. And then they talk about nut butters. And then they recommend one of their protein bars. So here's how you get your protein. 2 scoops of our protein powder and one of our protein bars every day. It literally says 365 days a year. And then it asks if I'd be interested in sharing tips. I can tell you I was interested in reporting that email as spam, but not before I printed it out for your entertainment. But, kind of all the jokes and kind of my salty attitude aside, stuff like this is just a problem because that could show up on one of who knows how many nutrition and fitness websites, news websites coming, from a purported expert. And people would read that and take that advice and think that's what they need to do and think oh, I need, 2 shakes and a bar every day in order to meet my protein intake, which you don't need to do that. So I am going to say I'm sorry for all the bad information that you're exposed to. Hopefully you tune into the show and you enjoy the show because I give you the good stuff, science, plus the practicality. Maybe I'll do a couple more of these because I get a lot of bad PR pitches, and I think that was pretty good. So let's get into today's show, 7 ways to boost your child's nutrition. And also, as I said in the intro, this actually doesn't just apply to kids. This could apply to you. If you don't have kids, it applies to you. If you do have kids, it still applies to you. It applies to your kids. It's just, it's solid advice. And I can tell you this is something that I spend a ton of time thinking about because, I have 4 kids who currently, recording this show, 2 14-year-olds, an 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And I'm always thinking about their nutrition. How are we talking to the kids about nutrition? What are the foods that we are serving them? What are the foods that we're helping them prepare? What's the foods that are available in our homes? How can we build a healthy relationship with food for our kids? I think about that all the time. And, we've moved through a huge, span of 4 kids under 4, and then, kind of now moving up into the teen and preteen years. So I've gotten a lot of different experience from food and kids, and also have read a fair amount of research. And fortunately, too, when I was at Penn State just had a great youth ingested behavior lab and research program. So looking at food and eating cues and how that impacts kids. So it's something that I'm super interested in, passionate about, and I've actually had a handful of requests over the last several months. When can you do something about kids and nutrition? Because, many of the listeners know I have kids, and I've mentioned before that it's something that I'm passionate about. So I wanted to do that show today. So I have 7 tips. First thing that is important to think about, the overarching thing here with our kids and nutrition is think about energy density. So energy density is basically calories per gram. You can think about it also as like the amount of calories in every bite of the food that you're eating. You can easily look at a food label. Hold on, I pulled this out before and someone was like, why do you have a box of Kix in your office? Because I use it for some demos with this barcode scanning app. But so basically what you do is you flip it over and you look at calories, and then you look at grams, and you just divide one by the other, right? And so ideally, you want the number of calories to equal the number of grams, right? If you can do that, so in this case, the Kix are 160 calories, and then it's 40 grams, right? So the gram weight does not match the calories. So this is a food you want to be careful about eating because it'd be easy to overeat. If you look at Barbara Rose's research, Dr. Barbara Rose, who I've talked about a lot, in her book, she says anything that's 0.6 or less. So when you look at calories per gram, if you kind of do that mental division and it's 0.6 or less, that's essentially a free food. I kind of like to stay away from the free food terminology, but you definitely could eat it freely. For all intents and purposes, like a 1 is like really simple, right? Calories equal grams. Are they 1-to-1? And if so, like those are the kinds of foods that you want to feed your kids as much as they can eat, right? And then as those numbers start getting up, if the energy density is 2, 3, 4, and then we start being more careful the higher we go, because it's just easier to consume all those calories. So that's just like a really quick litmus test that you can run with certain foods. And you're like, well, what kind of foods should I encourage them to eat? If you have an energy density of 1 or even 1.5, right, that's the kind of, that'll put you in the direction, in the arena of the foods that you want to be serving the kids. So step 1, the number one thing that you can do to boost your child's nutrition is increase availability of the foods that you want them to eat. And specifically, we're talking about fruits and vegetables. There was a study that was done at Penn State with kids looking at the having available pre-cut vegetables prior to dinner and that impact on vegetable consumption in those kids. And what they found was if there are vegetables that are pre-cut out and available before dinner, the total vegetable consumption of those kids is greater. And we know from Barbara Rose and her energy density research, the more vegetables that you eat, then the lower calories that you're going to consume. So it's a great way, I call it pre-eating. It's a great way to pre-eat or preload your kids with great healthy foods. So availability, one of the thing about processed or ultra processed foods is they're very available. And so how do we make the foods, these more fresh fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, nuts, how do we make those foods more available so they're easier to consume? I can tell you one of the other things that we do, I've done at my house, I've noticed we have this big sliding pantry, kind of a barn, sliding pantry door. And that's where we keep a lot of the dry stuff, including the snack foods. And I thought, man, like to get some sliced vegetables, like I always try to keep some sliced peppers, cucumbers, that sort of stuff in the fridge. Like to get the sliced vegetables, it's like many more steps, right? You open the fridge, you have to then open the drawer that the vegetables are in, open the container, etc. And if you want to get a snack food, it's pretty easy. It's like the pantry, maybe the pantry door is already open. You just reach in and grab it. So I was like, how can we create a little more friction? You've heard me talk about like the friction of healthy living. How can we create more friction around the foods that are less than ideal, right? The foods that we want to actually just kind of limit our consumption to. And, this is a classic strategy also in weight management. But when I'm thinking about kids and nutrition, like I really actually stay away from the ideas of weight management, weight control, weight loss. Like you just don't need to add that layer. Like the world talks about weight and weight loss and in so many different ways that one of the things that you want to get, hopefully when I'm reading through the notes today and talk about these 7 strategies, is it's all about teaching the kids about good nutrition, about fueling their body, about fostering good health. I mean, it's not like restriction, weight loss, bad foods, like that sort of stuff. And that's why I was saying at the beginning, this is just like the stuff we do with adults. Like if you've listened to the shows, like I'm all about the proactive. Like, let's talk about the things we should do, not the things we shouldn't do. Let's talk about the foods we should eat and allow those to displace the foods we shouldn't eat. And that's the same thing here. Let's make the proactive steps. That's why getting those, cut vegetables out and available is the way to go. Like, if you put out fresh cut fruit and fresh cut vegetables, like, our kids just plow through it. And if it's there, they'll eat it. If it's not there, they'll eat something else. So back to the pantry. So what I did was I got some like big Tupperware containers with lids that would stack. And I took, a bag of chips, like we'll have nachos on the weekend, or chips and guacamole, chips and salsa, watching a sporting event, that sort of stuff. And I put those in these big Tupperware containers. They're clear, so you can see what's in them, but they have lids, and then stack them in the pantry. And what I noticed was that those foods started to get consumed less, kind of in this a la carte snacking, that the kids would do during the day, because there was greater friction into getting those foods. So it's not the extreme example of like, let's put it in the pantry or in the cupboard above the refrigerator and lock it so you can't see it, out of sight, out of mind. It's not that. Like, it's in sight, and it's also could be in your mind, but there's just more friction into getting and eating those foods and getting those snack foods out. And so if we create that friction, decrease friction other ways, we can help start just automatically supporting more healthier choices. But the number one thing is really increase availability of foods, specifically fresh fruits and vegetables and nuts, right? That those are easy. We get them out. People are going to consume those foods. Number 2 is modeling and culture. The kids don't listen. I was trying to thinking what's a better way I could say this, but no, they just don't listen, right? Like, kids just don't listen. Like, when I was a kid, I didn't listen too. My mom's listening to this and she's probably nodding her head, right? Or maybe she's shaking her head and saying, no, he listened all the time. It was your sisters who didn't listen. But kids generally don't listen, right? They model the behavior that they see. And so really one of the number one things that you could do to help and support your kids' nutrition is to start making those better choices consistently yourself, and start making the choices that you want them to make. And when they see you do it on a consistent basis and embrace doing it, like doing it because you want to eat those foods, because they're going to make you healthier, because they're going to make you feel good, because they're going to fuel the machine. When they see you making those choices for those reasons, that's going to start building up in them and having them want to make those choices too. So how do you model and how do you create that culture around food that the kids are going to want to be a part of? I'll do a lot of talks with collegiate teams, strength coaches, college coaches. And whenever I'm talking to a team and the coaches in the room, I always say the number one thing that you can do is culture. Culture is set, culture like around food, because there's be a culture at practice. Strength coaches will have a great culture in the weight room. But what is the team's culture around food? And culture around food is just like anything else. It's set one bite at a time. And it's like coaches, upperclassmen, those are the people. And so in the family environment, it's parents, it's older siblings. And those older siblings, they get it from the parents. And the younger kids are going to see the older siblings do it. And that usually has more, pull in their mind than what the parents are doing. But it all starts by creating that culture. And that culture is created by action. So you do the actions. That culture is created one bite at a time. And if you do it, that's going to go such a long way into supporting good nutrition habits for your kids. So number 3 is you got to think you're in this for the long game, right? Your kids are going to be eating their whole lives. You don't need to make this happen instantly overnight, right? They don't need to like Brussels sprouts right now. I hated Brussels sprouts as a kid, right? And now I love them. And now I'm like ish about eating them so many places because everybody's obsessed with like covering them in bacon and oil, and like Brussels sprouts are good kind of almost on their own, right? We should get back to that. But what I'm saying is my feelings about Brussels sprouts don't matter. It's the long game. And don't feel upset or bad or angsty if your kids don't want to eat certain foods. As long as you keep exposing them to the foods and just make it like, hey, just try it, right? This is one of the things we always do with our kids. They're like, I don't want to eat. Like, you can just try it. I'm not even saying don't eat the whole thing. And you don't even know if you like it or not, but you got to try it. And oftentimes saying like, hey, you've never eaten Like our kids love avocados. I swear we're like 1 or 2 avocados a day in my house. And, we'll say like, you love avocados, but there was a point in your life where you had never had avocados before and you had to try it. And if you didn't, then you wouldn't be able to eat this food that you love, right? So that's a great way. And I think, we push back against if it's a new food and the kids will like, oh, I don't want to do that. I refuse to eat that, right? Like it's not about the food at that point. It's about something else. And so try to like step back. Don't confront directly and engage on that, on the pushback, but say more like, hey, give them the examples of why you want to try other foods, how it's good. This could be your favorite food, right? And it could not, but maybe it is going to be in a couple years. But you just got to know that keep getting them to try it and get them to taste and explore different kinds of foods. There's all kinds of research that'll be cited around how many exposures you need to have with a food before you like it or don't like it. I would say the research is super inconclusive, and researchers in this area will generally say it is inconclusive because there are a lot of factors, but it's somewhere in the realm of 12 to 16, right? So 12 to 16 exposures. And here's the other thing, like fruit's different. Vegetables don't necessarily taste good. Like no one bit into a carrot the first time and was like, oh my God, I need more of these, right? Like, no, like I enjoy I love eating vegetables, but I mean, they don't taste as good as other things. Like there are literally, we talk about this with the processed foods. We talk about this a lot in the minimally processed food challenge. Like there are foods that have been spent like millions of dollars invested in them being extremely delicious at the first bite, right? Vegetables is not like that. Like baby spinach does not have that kind of research and development behind it. So it's okay if the kids aren't crazy about different vegetables at first, because they don't taste great. Like it's something that you evolve to enjoy, and that part is important. So know that you're in this for the long game. I look at, some of our older kids now, foods that they eat all the time, like that they never would have eaten. Just keep going in a positive fashion, getting them the exposures. And I think too, the wild card here, and as I was saying, like the research is, kind of up in the air about how many actual exposures it takes because there's so many factors. Peer pressure and social environments. And we should do a show kind of on these unseen factors that impact our eating behaviors. But that's huge for kids. We've had one of our kids refuse to eat. It was hot dogs, right? And you're thinking, well, why are you making your kids eat hot dogs? I'm like, hot dogs can be delicious. And, I think going somewhere socially, burgers and hot dogs, like it's a very social thing. It's a life skill, right? Eating a hot dog. Unless you're a vegetarian, I guess. But you could have a tofu dog then. But so one of our kids like just had never had one, but just refused to eat it. And went to a birthday party, came back, oh, what'd you have for dinner? Oh, we had hot dogs. And I'm like, you had hot dogs at the party? And he was like, yeah, they're really good. I'm like, well, yeah, they're really good. I've been telling you this for like 3 years. But sometimes it just takes that social pressure of like, hey, this is what we're having to get someone to try something. So I know that the examples of like Brussels sprouts and hot dogs are like opposite ends of the spectrum, but the same forces are at play. And if you have multiple people in your family, hopefully you can harness some of those positive forces that of people liking foods and not liking foods. But keep in mind the thing with this tip is that you're in it for the long haul with your kids and their nutrition. So don't force it. Just be persistent and consistent and give them those exposures and model properly as in the previous tip, and you're going to get there. The fourth one is the why and the mindset. So this goes, I was talking a little bit about how we don't want to make this good, bad, don't eat this food. This food is, bad for you, or it's a bad food. Like, we don't want to do any of that stuff because that just creates this dichotomy that I think currently in nutrition, as people my age, a little bit younger, a little bit older, plus or minus 10 years, we're like working to undo all that like good, bad food stuff. And instead, I think it's important, and this is to the scientist in me, to just explain like, well, why is this a good food? I had this conversation with my 7-year-old the other day about fiber, and it was the difference between, whole grain breads and not whole grain breads and fiber and the benefits of fiber. Where else can you get it? And he was like, well, what about this food? I'm like, what about this food? Right. And so we got into this great conversation about what is fiber and why you want to eat it. And I find that kids soak that stuff up, that in so many situations in their life, they're told like, just do this. Right. And then they have to do it, whether it's school or sports or many times in different, family house settings. But if you can take the time to say, hey, this is why, like, we eat protein every single meal, like that's part of our family culture, part of our family food culture, because of this reason. And, it's important to drink milk. And why? Because milk has nutrients like calcium and phosphorus. And talking to them about why it's important to make these decisions. Or it's like, well, why don't we eat Doritos every day? It's not that Doritos are bad, right? Because it's hard to understand why Doritos would be bad, because at the same time, they're also delicious. So it's like a weird dichotomy for a kid. But to understand that it doesn't add any other benefit to support our health, and it's really easy to eat a lot of it, which isn't good for our bodies, right? So having those conversations with the kids, I think is super important, giving them the why and creating the mindset of nutrition is a powerful thing that I can use to be healthier. And obviously, if you're talking to, like when I'm talking to my 7-year-old, it's kind of a different conversation than I'm talking to my 14-year-old, like my 14-year-old son, who has much more of an interest in strength and athletics and building muscle. And, so the whys are a little bit different. And when they were 3 and 4, it's like more of a Sesame Street kind of, why are we doing this? But spend the time to get them excited about it and why we're doing this. Like, kids just love to latch on to that. So instead of just like, do it because I say, give them the why behind it. Number 5 is go slow and listen. So one of the things, kids just eat quick. Like, I think there are people who would define their children maybe as like picky eaters who eat a little bit slower. But a lot of times, especially as kids get older and they're growing, like they'll just eat a lot fast. And one of the things we're always telling our kids is let it hit you, right? They'll sit down, they're like, whoa, 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 eat. And they're like, I need some more. And what we always say is like, whoa, hey, just let it hit you. Just let it hit you. If you want more, that's fine. But like, let's give it 10 minutes. Let's give it 15 minutes. And then come back and let me know if you want more. And then we can do more. And why? We explain to them why. Because like you're eating it, it's in your stomach, but your body hasn't actually registered that you've eaten. And so if you wait 10 minutes, your body's then going to say like, oh, wow, I got this stomach full of food. I just ate all this food. And then you'll be able to make a better decision about if you're hungry or if you want to eat more food. Always encouraging. It's definitely a losing battle. And I'm going to take my own advice here and saying I'm in it for the long haul. But trying to get kids to eat slower, I find, is a broken record. But encourage them to eat slow and listen to their bodies. Just say, hey, let it hit you. Like, let the food you eat hit you, and then let's make the decision. Because I think that's a good life strategy when it comes to food and nutrition. But it also then teaches them to really kind of listen and what's going on. And what I've noticed over time, especially with the older kids, is that they've started to kind of bring that feeling and that reason into themselves. And that sometimes they'll eat and they'll say, well, I'm hungry still, but I'm going to wait a couple minutes and then see how I feel. And then a couple minutes go by and they're like, nah, I'm good. I don't need to eat anymore. Right. And that's when that happens, I'm like, man, I could possibly be winning at this parent nutrition thing. So it's really important. Encourage them to eat slowly and listen to their bodies. Let it hit you, then make the decision after that to see if you want more. But helping them regulate the amount of food that they're eating, self-regulate is a really important thing. So that's 5. Number 6, hide the vegetables. This might seem like a little left-hand turn, but hide the vegetables. Like, you can hide vegetables in all kinds of places. Talking about the research at Penn State, they were hiding squash in macaroni and cheese, which I can tell you is actually a lot easier than you think. Take like a butternut squash, you can puree it and you can mix it in with macaroni and cheese. You can increase the vegetable content by like 20% in these meals. The kids, then they get to eat more, which they like to eat more, but you're actually getting them more vegetables. So you're increasing or you're decreasing that energy density that we talked about, right? So the amount of calories becomes less per bite that they're eating. It's just a great research proven way to get more vegetables into kids' diets. Another thing that I usually do is with sauce, like pasta sauce, marinara sauce. We'll roast zucchini or summer squash, like that sort of thing, and it blends up with like a hand blender, so easy, into sauce. The sauce color changes a little bit. Like what I've noticed is kids, like, they can be really keen on texture and color. So, and that's actually the last one that we'll talk about. So don't go too crazy, because when you start mixing in vegetables, it lightens it up a little bit, make it if you're doing this with a marinara sauce. But adding vegetables into sauces like that is killer. I do it with chili also. Chili all the time. If you're making chili, especially our family is like huge on Texas chili, which is just like code for meat and sauce, like no beans or things like that. So roast, and then I'll blend in vegetables into the actual sauce of the chili. That's another great way to do it, to take something like Texas chili and enhance the vegetable content of it. So hide vegetables wherever you can. It's generally going to be in kind of pureeing and blending them in different kinds of sauces. You'll be amazed at what you can do with the hiding and the blending, but hide the vegetables. So the last tip number 7, is form changes everything. And if we look to food manufacturing and food companies and food marketing, you should know this, because why else would you make a dinosaur shaped chicken nugget, right? It definitely does not look like that normally. It takes extra effort to turn a chicken nugget into a dinosaur, because they figured out, like, well, if we make it into a dinosaur, the kids are going to want to eat it because it's dinosaurs, and dinosaurs are fun, right? So that's like the extreme example. But the form in which you feed food to kids can make a huge difference. Think of like slices of avocado versus guacamole, right? Totally different. Peanuts versus peanut butter. Like, one of the things for the longest time, I don't understand why, like, my kids are just anti-salad. Like, they won't. And this, again, it's like I consider this like a life nutrition skill. Like, my wife is really good at this stuff. And talking about, my wife is really good at this. My wife is so good. We were talking about those, having the conversations about why you're eating this and why these foods are important and why good nutrition is important for health and growth and development. Like, my wife is like Yoda at those conversations with the kids. But when we think about changing the shape of foods, my kids are all about fresh cut vegetables, right? Like we talked about in that Penn State study at the very beginning. Cut vegetables up, cucumbers, peppers, carrots, things like that. Leave them out, they'll eat them. But they like won't do salads for some reason. And I felt like I was forcing, like, no, we're going to sit and we're going to eat salads, right? And I remember my wife like, why? I mean, it's literally the same food, right? Minus lettuce, which is basically hard water. If we just do cut up vegetables, so let's just do that. So that's what we started doing. So instead of having a salad, like my wife and I would have a salad, and the kids would just have cut up vegetables, and they probably ate more actual vegetables by just being able to do cut up, like crudité style, instead of in a salad. So you can do it that way. Sometimes, people will eat tomatoes, right? Or they won't eat tomatoes, but they will eat tomato sauce, or they will do salsa. Like, think about how you can change the shape or the makeup of that food, how you're serving it. Fresh, roasted, boiled, steamed, grilled. There's so many different ways. Like, just because someone doesn't like a food one way, think of how you could change the shape and the appearance of it through cooking, cutting, and processing. And not like process, like ultra processed food processing, but by definition, ultra processed foods you can't do in your kitchen anyway. But how can you change the shape and appearance and how you're serving that food? And if you can do that, sometimes it's like a home run. I mean, I think going back to the chicken example, like if you took grilled chicken breasts, but instead you cut them in strips and put them on skewers, like all of a sudden that's like so much more fun. And sometimes it's just that. It's that change of shape that is what the kids need to really get involved. So if you're always having certain foods and you always eat the same foods, because we generally always do eat the similar kinds of foods, think, how can I change the shape? Roasted potatoes, cut them like French fries before you roast them, or serve them mashed, or slice them thin in circles. Like, there's a ton of different ways that you can do this kind of shape change of food from a preparation standpoint. And what you're going to find is, like, some kids like foods in one shape and they'll refuse to eat the same food, even if it's just cut differently. It's weird. I don't claim to have my PhD in psychology, but I'm just telling you, it works really well. So that wraps it up. Those are the 7 tips for how to optimize your children or your own nutrition. So let me run them back top to bottom so we have them. Availability is key, right? You're going to gravitate towards eating the foods that are more available, especially if we look at those like early evening time of day when people are hungry and kids are roaming around the house looking for something to eat. Get those fresh cut vegetables out there, fresh fruits, get them out there, and people are going to go nuts on them. Modeling and culture is number 1. Like how you react to food, talk about food, experience food, eat food, the food choices that you make. Are you begrudgingly eating vegetables, or you're like, yes, I'm so into it? I am over the top pro eating beans just to try to get my kids to be like, yeah, let's eat. We should do that. And I got to tell you, I'm going on the long game, which is tip 3, the next one, the long game on it, because currently none of them have any interest in beans. In fact, I'll tell you, so in the exposure, this is a window into my life. In the food exposure standpoint, they're currently lime cilantro rice is very hot at my house. And so I made some lime cilantro rice, and I was like, I'm going to mix in some black beans to this, like to try to get the kids to eat beans. Like it's a food I eat every day. And so I mixed 4 cups of cooked rice, maybe a quarter of a cup of beans, right? So this is like, you could eat a scoop and not get any, right? So I mixed it all up, and the kids are like, what is this? It was like mutiny at the dinner table. And I'm like, they're beans. And they're like, we're not eating beans, all this. So then somebody starts like the beans, the magical fruit chant. And I'm like, look, you just got to try it, right? There's so little beans in this that you're not even going to be able to taste it. But let's just try it, right? I'm literally taking my own advice I'm giving you. And so they take it. It's more of like this act. Like someone eats one. It's like a spoonful of rice. There's 1 bean and the rest of it's all rice. They're like, oh my God, I can't do this, right? This is all over dramatization. I'm like, look, guys, beans fuel a huge part of the population. Like they're actually a major protein source for so many people throughout the world. And then my slick-witted 11-year-old then goes, well, that's the problem. That's why we're having this problem with global warming, is everybody's eating all these beans and then there's all this gas. Like people need to eat less beans. At that point, I just shook my head and phoned it in for the day. And, I'll try to fight the bean fight later. But remember, you're in it for the long haul, and how you model and talk about it is so important. So those are tips 2 and 3. 4 is talk to them about the mindset, the why. Why are we eating this? Why is it important, to eat in this way or to eat these foods? 5 is to encourage them to eat slow and listen to their bodies, especially when it comes to going back for more servings. Just listen and see how your body feels. 6, hide vegetables wherever possible. My 2 easy ones here are roasted butternut squash pureed into mac and cheese, which kids loves mac and cheese, and then also doing zucchini or a summer squash in marinara sauce. That's another super easy win, or also in chili. And then the last one is shape changes everything. Just get creative. Find other ways that you can cut vegetables. If you're cutting carrots in long strips, do circles. We used to do that for the kids and call them gold doubloons, like after the Spanish gold coins, right? Just cut them up that way. Get creative, and how can you give kids foods that you're trying to get them to eat or want them to eat more of in different, more fun ways. All right. So those are the 7 tips. Thanks so much again for tuning in. I hope you got a laugh out of the protein email from that PR company to me. And if you like the show, subscribe on iTunes. Give me a rating and review on iTunes too. That would be really great. Share it with a friend. And we'll see you next week for another show.